It boasts some of the most famous people on the planet, claims to be capable of curing drug addiction, and says that following its teachings will lead to a life of success and fulfillment. And yet, despite these promises, Scientology remains an organization mired in controversy.
Their leader, the mysterious David Miscavige, who is at the centre of the church's greatest mystery of all, the whereabouts of his wife Shelley, missing now for 13 years. Do you think he has the ability, the will, to order his wife be locked away?
Absolutely, there's no question about it.
Next stop.
In Gilman Hot Springs, California, you'll find a massive building. The Scientology headquarters is not easy to miss, as it stands an imposing figure on the horizon, brightly lit with its calming blue, nearly resort-like appearance. David Miscavige, senior church officials, and around 1,000 of the church's elite Sea Org live and work within this building. It's also the location of a $10 million mansion built for Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard. But where is Scientology leader David Miscavige's wife? No matter who asks, how they ask, or how often this question is asked, the answer remains unclear. With multiple missing persons reports on file and no public appearance since 2007, where could Scientology leader David Miscavige's wife Shelley be? Despite ongoing efforts to unearth the events surrounding it, how someone can simply disappear, and how her new role as First Lady of the church may have played a part. As Michelle's disappearance is still shrouded in the same mystery, we can never be sure of where she's gone or in what manner she may have been disposed of. Still, we can look at the circumstances around it and get a better idea of how this mystery came to be. In the 70s, the Church of Scientology was adrift. Federal agents had unearthed 2 criminal conspiracies in which they had endeavored to retaliate against investigations by journalists, to infiltrate law enforcement and an assortment of government agencies. Hubbard fled to international waters years earlier, trying to find a remote location. He'd taken up residence on an old transport ship he'd named Apollo. On this ship, Hubbard found solace, adapting well to the life of a seafaring nomad. He'd outfitted the staff on his boat in naval uniforms, creating a paramilitary organization called the Sea Org. Membership was restricted to only the highest-ranking and most devoted Scientologists, including Hubbard's third wife, Mary Sue, whom he'd married in 1952. Sea Org had also included a group called the Commodore's Messengers Organization. Most of these messengers were teenage girls dressed in hot pants and halter tops and were at the Commodore's beck and call. They would fetch him drinks, record his utterances, draw his path, and relay commands to others. Among the most devoted messengers was Michelle Shelley Barnett. As depicted in photos from the web, she was a willowy beauty with strawberry blonde hair. She joined the messengers around the age of 12. A fellow shipmate at the time characterized Michelle as a sweet innocent who had been thrown into chaos. Shelley's father, Barney, was a handyman who had long since struggled to find work. Her mother was prone to emotional issues. The couple's shared faith in Scientology led them to leave their daughters, Shelley and her older sister Clarice, in the care of Hubbard. The kids' early education consisted of the little outside Hubbard's gospel, holding that people are immortal beings called thetans, which are trapped inside human bodies. Thetans are encumbered by traumas of engrams, which are collected over past lives. Only through proprietary therapeutic processes known as auditing could these engrams be cleared.
Auditing is the process of asking specifically worded questions designed to help you contact the past harmful experiences buried in your subconscious, reactive mind.
The messengers were devoted to Hubbard as their de facto parent. Shelley, however, was said to have worshipped him, hanging on to his every word and following orders with a precision well beyond her young age. She would be seen regularly shifting from sweet girl to sharp interrogator in a moment's notice. A few years after Shelley had left the ship, 11 church members, including Hubbard's wife, Mary Sue, would be charged with conspiracy and burglary. They were eventually convicted and served prison sentences. The Commodore escaped charges but was branded an unindicted co-conspirator. Spooked by these ongoing investigations, Hubbard spent a paranoid mess in the final years of his life. He says persecutors and turncoats, what he called apostates, were around every corner. He created an all-clear team to help defuse legal threats, composed chiefly of hardened Sea Org veterans and one fresh-faced 21-year-old David Miscavige. Miscavige had been similarly raised into the Scientology lifestyle, pursuing the passions of his family with terrier-like aggression. By the age of 12, David would conduct auditing sessions with adults, and by 16, he had dropped out of high school and signed a billion-year contract like all the new Sea Org members, locking him in full-time and forever.
At age 16, David Miscavige joins the Sea Org, the religious order of the church, and develops a close relationship with church founder L. Ron Hubbard.
He lived in a dorm at the church's national headquarters. Ex-Scientologist Mark Fisher remarks that he had been unlikable to peers and known to sacrifice others for his own gain, reporting every wrongdoing. Fisher had made the unfortunate mistake of confiding his doubts about Scientology to Miscavige, who had all Fisher's things removed from their shared dorm and into the hallway, leaving him nowhere to sleep. However, Miscavige's charisma charmed the messenger girls, who had decamped to Clearwater alongside him while Hubbard plotted his next moves. Shelley was among these girls, who was just 9 months younger than him at the time. Their romance budded, beginning around 1978. This romance, however, did nothing to improve Shelley's social standing with her peers, who had long since deemed her too young and status-hungry, often excluding her. She was lonely and isolated, abandoned her whole life, and now by her peers. Once Miscavige entered the picture, Shelley fixated. They were married by 1982. Back then, Shelley was more equal to her husband than she would be less subservient, as she was not in a junior position. Meanwhile, in 1985, while struggling to recover from the aneurysm, Shelley's mother became involved with a splinter group within Scientology that both defied and enraged David Miscavige. The group rejected Miscavige's eminent leadership and high-ranking position in Scientology. Later that year, she would be found dead in what police deemed a suicide. Observers, however, wondered how a small woman at just 5'3" could shoot 4 bullets in her own chest and head with a long rifle. Shelley's reaction upon learning of the death was apparent, according to former church members. Karen de la Carriere remembers Shelley saying, "Good riddance to that bitch." Michelle Miscavige took on many duties at her husband's right hand, reportedly leading the project in 2004 to find a new wife for Tom Cruise after his split with his current girlfriend, Penelope Cruz. Supposedly, she met with actresses who are already Scientologists, under the understanding they'd be auditioning for a new Mission Impossible movie, though the story was refuted by Cruz's attorney. Shelley was in charge of around a dozen staffers who worked in the executive office in her position beside David. The job she held, the chairman of the board assistant, was effectively to do whatever her boss wanted her to at any given moment. She would sometimes slip into the role of unofficial counselor, and other times valet. This became the nature of their relationship. Flanked on his other side, it was David's second most important female accessory, Lori Stuckenbrock, who in turn functioned as a communicator. The nature of their relationship had begun to deteriorate, and several ex-Scientologists claimed that Shelley's husband had become more like a boss than a partner. They would go out at night accompanied by yes men, and at the end of the night, they'd then retire to their own separate rooms. They were never affectionate with one another, nor physically intimate. Several sources claim that Shelley began to obsess over her physical appearance at this time. By 2006, ex-members of the church claimed her mood and physical appearance had started to take a turn for the worse. Shelley's own rigid adherence to her all-natural diet made her increasingly gaunt in appearance. Relationships with certain female colleagues began to grow strained. She would claim that attractive women within the church were going behind her back with David, like Tom DeVock's then-wife, who was prone to wearing snug clothing. However, there's no evidence that either the women or Miscavige was unfaithful, and many ex-colleagues claimed to have never seen him going behind Shelley's back. However, they described him as surrounding himself with young beauties who hung on his every word. This was one of many parallels Shelley would have fixated on about her husband. She was determined to not become another Mary Sue, the loyal wife summarily abandoned by her husband. She found guidance from an essay by Hubbard about a 19th century war hero, Simon Bolivar, because his mistress, Manuela Saints, had not adequately supported him. Hubbard argued Bolivar died of failure. Not long after, Michelle's story began to grow darker. Due to the shroud of secrecy around the Church of Scientology, it's hard to come by information about Michelle around this time in her life. Between 2005 and 2006, Shelley had essentially disappeared from her presence in the church, potentially due to exceedingly displeasing her husband. By this point, David is said to have become more and more demanding of members of the church and being outright abusive towards them. Sources close to Shelley have revealed that Shelley may have been trying to do something good for her husband, attempting to restructure some of the church's organizations, but he didn't see it that way. Not long after this incident, Shelley disappeared. The next and last time Shelley Miscavige would ever be seen in public was when she attended her father's funeral in 2007. Like Hubbard, Miscavige had developed a siege mentality. The case of Lisa McPherson was the first big trigger. She suffered a fatal pulmonary embolism 17 days into a Scientology auditing process designed to help treat her mental instability. The church would then go on to face 2 felony charges, but those were dropped after a medical examiner shifted the cause of death from undetermined to accident. In settling a civil lawsuit, the church paid McPherson's family an undisclosed sum.
But tonight, a former Scientology insider will allege that there is much we don't know about this famously powerful, wealthy, and secretive institution. Allegations of misuse of power and physical harassment. ABC's Dan Harris brings us an exclusive interview with a woman who was once a high-ranking church official. In his report, Scientology, an insider speaks.
This was followed by a PR nightmare caused by a growing group of defectors, including some ex-members from the highest levels of Sea Org. Miscavige reportedly would systematically terrorize, humiliate, and abuse Sea Org members, especially those suspected of being suppressive persons. When David wasn't choking, shoving, or punching his staff, his lieutenants were ordered to do so. These transgressors, or perceived transgressors, were routinely spirited to secret detention facilities similar to North Korean-style re-education camps. They would spend months or years in these facilities, eating a subsistence diet of rice and beans, performing labor and menial tasks like scrubbing bathrooms with your tongue in one case, and being isolated from anyone outside of the base. Those who wished to escape would have to run past armed guards and spiked fences, undergo outward harassment, and subsequently isolation from friends and family that had been left behind. The harshest punishments were given to those in David's innermost circle, who were often blamed for the scandals. Lieutenants would often be sentenced to a squalid, makeshift prison called the Hole. They were compelled to fight for their jobs, often literally. One time, this surmounted in a game of musical chairs set to Bohemian Rhapsody. However, even defectors say they never say Miscavige touched his wife in anger. Instead, they agree they'd seen her enduring verbal abuse. She'd be yelled at for not doing his bidding, or admonished for other perceived slights. Shelley became hardened by this behavior, and she became prone to sudden outbursts. Many would put up with it, feeling a connection enough to her past behaviors to see through the harshness. At her core, peers claimed, despite all her faults, that Shelley was a decent and caring person with motherly instincts, as she took the messenger girls under her wing as mentors. Even those who disliked her felt bad for the First Lady, as she was inherently shy and often appeared lonely and isolated. Many members of the organization saw Shelley as Sea Org's most valuable shock absorber, as they called her. For one, she would come in on Miscavige's heels after a particularly brutal verbal breakdown and pull them back together. According to former Sea Org members, many church members had no clue how much Shelley would protect them. She was known to slyly adjust some outrageous policies within the church and intervene during her husband's rages as the final line of defense. It would begin with gentle dissuading, a nudge, or sometimes she would physically restrain him from the behavior. By late 2006, sources claim Shelley was tasked with what they refer to as a Sisyphean project. She was set to satisfy her husband's wishes for a new and improved org board to reshuffle the corporate makeup. Shelley, despite months of nonstop drafting and redrafting, fared no better. Miscavige continued to reject everything. At this point, however, the pair were communicating from afar. Suddenly, and rather uncharacteristically, Miscavige had felt a sudden, strong need to be alone in Los Angeles, closer to the church's publishing unit. Shelley remained in the int base. She made 2 executive decisions without the okay of her husband for reasons that only Shelley herself could explain. First, she disseminated the chart and informed people of the new duties and titles. Then she facilitated renovations on Miscavige's living quarters and had some of his belongings boxed up and moved to a temporary housing unit. It didn't take long for these decisions to take hold with Shelley, as she began to grow sheepish and withdrawn. She didn't contribute any longer and told her domestic staff to not bother taking care of her. It was as though she knew she would be in trouble very soon. Shelley was soon stripped of her duties and would begin to be shadowed by a watchful handler, notably during her father's 2007 funeral. Her attendance then was the last public appearance of Shelley Miscavige, and seems like a kindness, as Shelley may have allowed her relationship with her mother to deteriorate. She had, in turn, remained close with her father over the years. At the funeral, Shelley went to a bathroom and was approached by a former Scientologist, who had been deemed a suppressive person, to whom she admitted she had made a mistake, and this meant she wouldn't be able to help them, or anyone. Soon it seemed like things were changing very quickly. Suddenly, it was as though the First Lady of Scientology suddenly didn't exist anymore, almost like she never had. Several missing persons reports were filed with authorities, notably by actress Leah Remini. Remini would leave the church in 2013 after disagreeing with the church's policies that forbade members from questioning David Miscavige on Shelley's disappearance. Leah was a former friend and pen pal of Shelley's. Problems with Remini began at the 2006 wedding of Tom Cruise and his new partner, Katie Holmes, a $3 million studded affair at a 15th century castle in Italy. Among guests were Brooke Shields, Giorgio Armani, Jim Carrey, Will and Jada Pinkett Smith, David and Victoria Beckham, and fellow Scientologists John Travolta and Kelly Preston. Remini was there as well, and began to ask guests and Scientology officials why Shelley was nowhere to be found. She was subsequently punished for her questioning and asking where the leader's wife was. Remini would interview Valerie Hanley, who had served 22 years in the church's Sea organization and had been the personal assistant to Shelley Miscavige. Hanley says she last saw Michelle Miscavige crying as she entered a vehicle outside the Gold Base, an internal Scientology headquarters in Riverside County, California. When Remini filed her missing persons report on Shelley's behalf in 2013, the LAPD reportedly classified the report as unfounded, indicating she was not missing. They refused therein to provide any details as to the state she was found in, where she was found, or if she was currently in the presence of church officials. In the end, if they did see Shelley in the first place, if Shelley seemed well and went on to assure them that she was doing well, it doesn't matter what reportedly was going on. There would then be no question about how she is and no reason to follow up. Detective Kevin Becker of the LAPD Hollywood Division, a friend of Remini's, provided a written statement to the Daily Beast about Shelley Miscavige's wellness check. This letter read, most notably, "I and many other detectives believe the investigation was very poorly handled, and the LAPD fell way short on this one." In a threatening response, Glassman Media Group, the law firm that represents the Church of Scientology, called the claims false, and that evidence of Shelley's whereabouts were not provided as to not dignify the prosperous allegations. They declined to give proof or information on her current state or whereabouts, but claimed she was living her life to her choosing and not missing.
What's the Church of Scientology so afraid of? Miss Remini needs to move on with her life instead of pathetically exploiting her former religion. When you stop people's lives and families, I'll stop too.
Remini and her co-host Mike Rinder of their show Scientology and the Aftermath share a belief as to where Shelley might be. They believe that Michelle is being kept at the Church of Spiritual Technology, a heavily fortified complex near Lake Arrowhead, California. The Vaults House Scientology founder L. Ron Hubbard collected works on gold compact discs and nuclear shelters. The CST is where Scientologists are said to be preparing for Armageddon. Their belief includes that since 2005, this is where Michelle Miscavige had been held. Though while she may have been let out for her father's funeral, nobody has seen her since. Remini herself has noted that unless Shelley comes out herself, saying she's alive and well, she is as good as dead. Rinder claims he was once contacted by a person at CST whose sole job was to monitor Shelley's whereabouts, maintaining they explored Shelley's disappearance on Aftermath due to the overwhelming response and demand for a show on the circumstances. A TSA whistleblower, Robert McLean, allegedly shared many details about his employment with the Church of Scientology. He claimed to have worked for 6 months when she was there, though he never had contact with her. He claims that a few vehicles would come and go through the week, but the 7-day-a-week, 12-hour shifts were otherwise dull, and everyone assigned to the detail came to hate it. They were told they were there because of Shelley. However, after this quote surfaced about the time, McLean claims he was misquoted and wished to be left alone. Many people have concluded that he was simply scared of the church's retaliation. Many have raised flags about Shelley Miscavige's fate, but LAPD quickly closed the case. The church itself continues to give the runaround surrounding Shelley, that she's on a special project or visiting a sick relative. This cryptic explanation and lackluster response by the LAPD only continued to fuel the mystery. Had Michelle fled the church, was she hiding? Some defectors believe she may have been exiled to one of many secretive, heavily guarded bases that her church owns in remote western locales. Those sent to these locations endure a life of isolation, labor, and penury. The reason for this is simple. In Scientology, the law is clear. The closer you are to David Miscavige, the harder you'll fall. So where is Shelley Miscavige? One thing to keep in mind in cases like this is Occam's razor. It is the principle of theory construction. In the simplest terms, it means that frequently, the simplest explanation is also the most likely one. Many believe that Shelley is being held and re-educated, and others believed she is disposed of and dead. While we can't rule any out necessarily either one of them, we can likely rule out the out-of-left-field explanations people have come up with that don't fit into either column. Shelley Miscavige is a woman who lived under the thumb and watchful eye of a church, taught to believe everything she's ever known. It's a church that doesn't believe in freedom of expression and thought even less of those who dissented, even in subtle, personal ways. In short, the question of where Shelley is one we may never have the answer to. As mentioned, some believe Shelley is being held in the facility under heavy guard to ensure she lives her life out of the limelight. If she is alive and well, these wellness checks would have seen a woman possibly not under duress, having undergone re-education for years by this point. If she were uncovered, it's worth noting that Shelley Miscavige has never known anything other than Scientology. Born into the church and indoctrinated under the direct care of Hubbard himself. On the other hand, many believe she may simply be dead, that this is too extensive of a missing persons case, and she must have been disposed of years ago, neatly swept under the rug by top-ranking officials. They bow to David Miscavige's every word for fear of being the next one to go. The only thing we know is that Scientology and L. Ron Hubbard have made people disappear once they posed a threat in the past. Today, Scientology leader David Miscavige has been served to appear in connection with new lawsuits alleging kidnapping, assault, human trafficking, and many other matters. If Shelley Miscavige ever escaped and contacted law enforcement, they would descend on the organization. Shelley has more information on the church than any other member due to her unbarred proximity to David over the years. If Shelley had, at any point, decided to dump the information she had, it might mean the end of Scientology as we know it.